Breaking news tonight from Hollywood. What we're about to reveal will shake everything you thought you knew about one of cinema's most iconic stars, Liam Neeson. The name alone commands respect. The face that saved Schindler's List. The voice that made "I Will Find You" a cultural phenomenon. But behind the legend lies a story so devastating, so brutal, that even his closest friends couldn't have imagined it. A childhood marked by crushing poverty, sleeping fully clothed in freezing rooms, nearly beaten to death in a boxing ring at age 14. A motorcycle crash that should have killed him. Doctors who didn't expect him to survive the night. And then, the phone call that destroyed everything. March 2009. A skiing accident that seemed minor. A headache that wouldn't go away. And within hours, the woman he loved more than life itself gone. But here's what they never told you. What happened in that hospital room. The decision he had to make while his wife's heart was still beating. The machine that had to be turned off. And the sound, that haunting sound when everything went silent. Tonight, we're revealing the full truth. The poverty. The pain. The $2 million he lost believing in stories nobody wanted. The nights he sat in his car, unable to walk into his own house because the silence inside was too brutal to face. This is not the Liam Neeson you think you know. This is the real story. And it starts right now. June 7th, 1952. Ballymena, Northern Ireland. A small grey house where hope went to die. Before the fame. Before the fortune. Before anyone knew his name. Liam Neeson was being shaped by a wound that would never fully heal. The Neeson family lived in a 3-room house with 6 people. The wallpaper literally peeled from the walls like skin worn past repair. The floorboards screamed with every step. And winter? Winter arrived without invitation and refused to leave. His father, Barney, swept corridors at a school his own son would never attend. His mother, Kitty, cooked for other people's children, returning home with hands burned raw, hoping the leftovers would last the night. But here's what nobody tells you. Here's the shocking part. Young Liam slept in a corner. Not a bedroom. A corner. A space that seemed to shrink year after year. And on the coldest nights, he slept fully clothed. Shoes still on. Because warmth was a luxury that required wages they didn't have. Listen to his own words, spoken decades later, his voice still carrying the scar. I felt as if I existed on a lower rung of life. A lower rung of life. Let that sink in. This wasn't just poverty. This was systematic exclusion. A Roman Catholic family in a Protestant town. The looks that lingered. The whispers that followed. The doors that never opened. His Aunt Molly saw what others missed. She would later reveal. He kept a great deal inside. But once he chose a direction, nothing shifted him. That inner steel was about to be tested in the most brutal way imaginable. When the pressure threatened to crush him, his father made a decision. Out of care or fear, 9-year-old Liam was sent to the church boxing club. The halls smelled of sweat and sawdust. The ropes bore silent marks of effort and forgiveness. And beneath those swinging fists, a boy learned how to fight before he learned how to speak what he felt. He never fought for glory. He fought to belong. To prove he could take a hit and stay upright. By age 14, he was unstoppable. Youth champion 3 years in a row. Unbeaten in the ring. And then came the night that nearly killed him. Under flickering lights, a crowd roaring like thunder. One clean hit arrived without warning. His head snapped back. And listen carefully to what happened next, in his own words. The world drained of color and sound. I fell into a blank space where even breath abandoned me. It felt as if my mind simply shut down. He was knocked unconscious. At 14 years old. Alone in that darkness, not knowing if he would wake up. When sound returned, it came violently. Shouting. Chaos. The metallic scream of the bell. And something irreversible took hold. He left the ring that same night. No farewell. No trophies. No one telling him what to do next. He walked past the changing room with blood-gummed hands dangling at his sides and stepped straight into the cold. His father's pride collapsed into wordlessness. His mother's relief turned to prayer. From that moment forward, he trusted control more than joy. He trusted restraint more than happiness. The boy who almost died in that ring would carry that fear for the rest of his life. And it would shape everything that followed. If you think leaving home opened the world to him, think again. It tore away the last thin layer that kept the cold at bay. Belfast, barely 17 years old. Liam Neeson carried almost nothing that could protect him. A battered suitcase, a thinning coat, and a vow he never spoke aloud. He worked jobs that broke men twice his age. Driving trucks through freezing rain. Hauling crates until his hands split open. Shoveling gravel until his back locked in protest. At night, he returned to a rented room no larger than a prayer. Damp walls, weary floorboards, a single bulb buzzing over an unmade bed. And on the coldest nights, listen to this, he slept fully dressed, shoes still on, because warmth had to wait for wages. Years later, he would remember those nights and think, this is how a person learns to keep going without expecting relief. He tried education, entered St. Mary's College, dreaming of becoming a teacher. But hunger has a way of interrupting every lesson. In his own words, I counted every coin before buying bread, and some days I walked away without it. When the money disappeared, he left, quietly, without protest or farewell. Another future folded and put away. What followed was not progress. It was endurance stretched thin. He drove lorries, built walls, loaded cargo, exchanging strength for survival. His hands cracked, his shoulders bowed, his nights filled with the distant laughter of people whose lives seemed to be moving somewhere. And then at age 30, he stood before a cracked mirror and almost gave up. I was close to giving up. I was 30, broke, and angry at the man in the mirror. Some evenings he stood there, staring at a stranger with tired eyes, searching for a reason not to disappear. Outside, buses rolled past carrying other futures. His never seemed to stop. But in 1976, at age 24, something shifted. He found work sweeping the stage at the Lyric Players Theatre in Belfast. Not success, permission to remain. Within weeks, the janitor was handed a role. 2 lines, nothing more. But standing there, in his own words, I felt noticed, for the first time in my life. 2 lines, that's all it took. 2 lines to save a man's life. Fast forward to the 2000s. Liam Neeson had finally made it. Schindler's List had won 7 Academy Awards. His face had crossed continents. His name was known. But success has a strange way of testing conviction. Between 2004 and 2008, Liam Neeson quietly invested nearly $2 million of his own money into films that critics admired, but audiences completely overlooked. Kinsey, Breakfast on Pluto, 5 Minutes of Heaven. He believed in stories that weren't easy, stories that mattered, and he paid for that belief with his own fortune. In his own words, I trusted stories that weren't easy. He signed checks as balances faded, choosing conviction over comfort, choosing art over security. For a man who had slept with shoes on because he couldn't afford heat, this wasn't just financial risk. This was existential terror. He was hemorrhaging money. His savings were evaporating. And at age 56, he was staring at the very real possibility of losing everything he had fought for. And then, at the darkest moment, the world answered in an unexpected language. Taken, an unassuming action film shot in Paris. Dismissed before release. Given a modest budget and low expectations. What audiences saw was not just brutality. It was grief. Something lived behind those eyes. The film erupted. $223 million worldwide. In his own words, it felt like being pulled back from the edge. The man who once counted coins before buying bread had been rescued by 3 words. I will find you. But rescue came with a price. And that price was about to be paid in blood, sweat, and broken bones. The year 2000, long before loss would take his wife. Fate came for Liam Neeson through another door. A motorcycle. An open road. Sunlight slicing clean across the asphalt. And then a deer. Impact. Not the sound of a crash, but a sudden violent eraser of sound, as if the world inhaled and forgot how to exhale. He was thrown clear. His body struck the ground with a force meant to end a story. When his eyes opened, the sky lay sideways. Unreal. Under hospital lights, doctors spoke without comfort. His pelvis shattered in multiple places. Internal damage severe. Survival uncertain. They did not expect him to last the night. But he did. Bolted together with steel and screws. Rebuilt into the rough silhouette of a man who refused to disappear. Recovery was not heroic. It was humiliating. He learned to measure progress not in days but in inches. Bed to chair. Chair to door. Sometimes he didn't make it that far. Listen to this. Once alone, he tried to stand and collapsed halfway. Pain folding him to the floor. Breath tearing out of his chest. He stayed there longer than he wanted to admit. Cheek pressed to the cold. Waiting for the room to stop spinning. In his own words, the nights were worse. The pain didn't stab. It sang. A low, merciless hum lodged in my bones. Years later, he would joke about living half awake. But those close to him knew the truth. He avoided rest because stillness made memory louder, sharper, less survivable. The metal is still in his body. Even now, at 73 years old, every step carries the weight of that crash. Every movement negotiates with pain. But that wasn't the worst thing that would happen to him. Not even close. Before the tragedy that would define him, there were other losses. Quieter, but no less devastating. The set of Excalibur. A guarded 29-year-old met a woman whose confidence seemed elemental. Helen Mirren. She was composed where he was still assembling himself. Luminous where he was cautious. And she saw him. Not the roles. Not the potential. But the man from Ballymena. For 4 years, they built a life. A modest London flat. Scripts. Unwashed mugs. And the small sounds of 2 people trying to grow. She taught him how to dress without shrinking. How to enter rooms without apology. You belong here, she told him once. Even if you don't feel it yet. But recognition bends what it touches. As his work drew attention, rumors crept in. Whispers that he leaned on her stature. It cut him. Not because it bruised his pride, but because it placed her beneath a weight she never asked to carry. He retreated. Longer days on set. Shorter conversations. One winter evening, she spoke with a calm that struck deeper than anger. We weren't meant to stay together. But I loved him very much. She packed. The taxi idled. Her hand lifted once behind the glass. When the door closed, it wasn't fury that filled the room. It was absence. Years later, he would admit. She was the first person who made me feel like I was enough. And the first to show me I didn't yet know how to hold it. For years of silence followed. Long, narrow. Stripped of color. And then, Julia Roberts, the set of satisfaction. She was 20, restless, radiant. He was 36, quieter, measured. She brought a summer that didn't burn. It lingered, curious, open, but inevitably momentum intervened. Mystic Pizza, Steel Magnolias, Pretty Woman. The world wanted her all at once. And the world never waits. One evening, as she packed for another city, he said softly, "You'll be extraordinary." She smiled with a gratitude that held sadness. "You already were." Years later, she would call him the kindest man I'd ever known. He never corrected her. He kept her laughter somewhere protected, between memory and breath. He had learned how to survive alone, mistaking control for calm, stillness for safety. What he never understood was that peace was not a destination. It was a temporary ceasefire. And when life returned to collect what it had delayed, it did not arrive with violence. It arrived quietly. It arrived precisely as her. 1993 Broadway, the stage of Anna Christie. At 41, Liam Neeson stood composed, grounded, a man held together by habit rather than ease. Across from him stood Natasha Richardson, 30 years old, shaped by theater, raised among legends. During rehearsals, they spoke little. Silence carried the weight. Eyes lingered. Stillness stretched until it became unmistakable. By opening night, performance and truth had quietly collapsed into one. When the curtain fell, Natasha turned toward him, laughing, bright, slightly unsteady. He leaned close, whispering a simple thank you. The words were small. What they held was not. In 1994, they married in Millbrook, New York, by candlelight instead of cameras, rain tapping against the windows. Liam would later admit, almost startled, "For the first time in my life, breathing no longer felt like effort." Mickey arrived in 1995, Daniel a year later, their home filled with warmth instead of noise. Natasha sang while cooking, the kitchen cluttered with toys, scripts, unfinished days. Summers passed in green, unhurried places, evenings by the fire, reading scripts aloud. In his own words, "She was my compass. She was where things went quiet." Their days were ordinary in the rarest way. For a man who had spent decades drifting between cities and borrowed lives, that house felt like time had finally slowed enough to be trusted. At night, he lay awake listening to Natasha breathe and thought, "This is what peace sounds like." And then came a day so bright it seemed untouchable. March 2009, snow on the slopes near Montreal. Laughter carried easily through cold air. The kind of afternoon that assumes tomorrow is guaranteed. Natasha fell while skiing. Nothing violent, nothing alarming. She stood, smiled, dismissed it. Later, the headache arrived, and it refused to leave. Liam was filming in Toronto when the call came. He remembered the phone slipping in his hand, the way the world narrowed to a single word that would not organize itself into meaning. He flew north immediately, gripping his wedding ring until it cut into his skin. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and inevitability. Machines breathed where language failed. A doctor spoke to him quietly, already apologizing with his eyes. The sentence arrived without mercy. Liam walked into her room expecting contradiction. Movement, breath, error. Natasha lay still, her face untouched, her skin warm enough to lie. For one brutal moment, hope appeared. Convincing, cruel. He took her hand. Years earlier, in a conversation neither of them thought would ever be needed, they had spoken about this very moment. If one of them could not return, the other would not cling, would not delay what could still help someone else live. When the doctors asked, Liam did not hesitate. This was her wish, not his strength. When he finally nodded, the machines obeyed. The sound they made when they stopped was not loud. It was final. Natasha's heart continued to beat for people she would never meet. 3 lives woke because SHE did. Outside, snow kept falling, flawless and indifferent. Inside, something essential was torn away. Later, Liam would say, almost to himself, she would have wanted it this way. When the machine stopped, something in him stopped too. He moved through the months that followed like a man wearing his own body without inhabiting it. In his own words, "If I slow down, the quiet finds me." Grief did not arrive with noise. It settled in closets, in mirrors, in the empty space beside him at night. And every year when snow returned, he remembered the sound it made that day. Soft, endless, falling not like punishment, but like something colder, like truth. After Natasha was gone, Liam Neeson did not collapse publicly. But privately? That's a different story. He worked until time lost its edges, crossed oceans without noticing landfall, spoke lines written by strangers because his own words had been spent. Nights became interchangeable. Hotel air conditioners humming, cold blue glow leaking through curtains, a bed that felt too wide to forgive him. He filled the hollow with work. The gray, the A-team, unknown. Speaking of the gray, he admitted, "I needed the role to release something I couldn't reach any other way." On screen, audiences watched a man fight wolves in frozen wilderness. What they never saw was the truer battle. A man forcing his body into danger, so his heart wouldn't shut down completely. But here's what they really don't want you to know. Once, he sat in a parked car outside a rented house long after midnight. Engine off, keys in his palm, unable to open the door, because inside meant the quiet would have walls. He He waited until dawn thinned the dark, then went in. After Natasha's death, whiskey became anesthesia. One glass at dusk, another before midnight. In his own words, "I was trying to quiet my head." One morning he caught his reflection and didn't recognize the man looking back. Hollowed, dulled, surviving but not present. That was enough. He stopped. It wasn't helping, and my boys needed to see how you stay upright. He tried to move forward. He met Freya St. Johnston, someone who understood broken things. For 2 years he tried. Dinners, shared laughter, something fragile. But grief is territorial. It does not share space easily. When he said he wanted to focus on his sons, it was true, and incomplete. Years later, when asked if love could return, he answered with a single word. No, not sharp, not bitter, simply finished. It wasn't rejection. It was recognition. The motorcycle crash in 2000 should have been the end, but it was only the beginning of a different kind of battle. His pelvis was shattered and rebuilt with steel and screws. That metal is still in his body today, but the pain didn't stop there. After 60, the cramps began. Sudden, vicious, striking in the dead of night. His legs seized without warning, muscles twisting as if replaying every old injury at once. He called them shooting pains. In his own heartbreaking words, "I'd get up, walk it off, stretch. And sometimes I'd just cry." Years of strain, caffeine, exhaustion, turned into electricity under his skin. He quit coffee. The pain didn't vanish. It retreated just enough to let him stand. On the set of Taken, the gray, nonstop, run all night, he kept doing his own stunts. Not out of bravado, out of defiance, maybe fear. Every fall, every sprint through freezing rain, took something that did not come back. Between takes, he stood still, waiting for the ache to loosen its grip. In his own words, "You can't cheat gravity. You only meet it where you are." His knees stored decades of impact. His back greets mornings with warnings instead of flexibility. On screen, he looked unbreakable. Behind the scenes, he was held together by will, metal, and the memory of a woman who believed he could keep going. 2026, age 73. Liam Neeson's net worth is estimated between $140 and $150 million. But money in his story never reads as triumph. It reads as breathing room. His sons are grown. Michael took his mother's last name. Daniel chose privacy over spotlight. Between the three of them lives a silence that requires no translation, only care. Every February, Liam visits her resting place. He brings flowers, brushes snow from her name, and speaks to her as though she were just out of sight. Sometimes, he believes he hears her reply, not in words, but in wind. In recent years, he's found companionship with Pamela Anderson, two people who've been misunderstood publicly, two people who've survived grief. Their bond carries quiet ease, tenderness without urgency. What defines Liam Neeson is not what he accumulated. It's what he refused to let calcify. He never turned loss into spectacle. He never weaponized suffering for sympathy. He simply kept standing, carefully, imperfectly, honestly. The lesson embedded in his life is not about power, not about triumph. It's about carrying grief without letting it harden into bitterness, about allowing pain to shape you without allowing it to shrink you. Some loves do not disappear. They change form. They become the air that follows you, the silence that shapes you, the warmth that never quite leaves the bones. For Liam Neeson, grief was never something to outrun. It became something he learned to carry carefully, fiercely, like a flame shielded with both hands. Not because it hurts less, but because its light was hers. And every year when the snow begins to fall, he remembers the sound it made that day. Soft, endless, falling like forgiveness. This is the real Liam Neeson, not the action hero, not the movie star, but the man who turned pain into motion, who carved meaning from endurance, who learned that survival is not about winning. It's about refusing to disappear. If this story moved you, remember, strength is not the absence of breaking. It's the choice to stand back up. Again, and again, and again. Rest in peace, Natasha Richardson, 1963 to 2009. Your light still guides him home.